And so what we're going to look at are point objects. So you guys are probably familiar with points in AutoCAD, used them a little bit. These points in Civil 3D are completely different, okay? They look similar, but these guys have intelligence associated with them. So they'll have a point style, the way they look. They'll have a point label style that you can associate with them. And also, they will have information such as a point number. They will have a description very often, an elevation associated with them, and other features, latitude, longitude, those kind of things. So besides northing and easting. So they basically are an XYZ position, but they have more intelligence than that. Civil designers, civil engineers probably don't use points. You could probably do everything in Civil 3D without using points at all if you're a civil engineer. But surveyors, points are kind of the heart and soul of how we do everything. So when we're out in the field locating stuff, we're locating points, we're giving them descriptions, we're bringing that stuff in, we're utilizing it. So knowing how to use points is very, very important, okay? So we're going to look at point objects today, and I want to show you first right off the bat these guys called transparent tools. That's very important in Civil 3D, and I'll show you that. And we're going to look at description keys. We're not going to do much with description keys, but I want to mention them because they're turned on currently and they will impact your points sometimes, so we need to look at that. When you set up how the points are going to come in, you go through this thing called the Create Points tool. And it has several options within it: default layer, points creation, styles, name format, and point identity. So we'll look at that guy. And then there are a whole slew of ways of creating points. So we're going to just look at a few of them. The first one we're going to look at is the miscellaneous area, northing and easting, manual, bearing, but there's a whole bunch of them. So we're not going to get into all of these today. And then you have create points by intersections, which is something that surveyors do quite a bit. We work with these. And then they have point creation tools that are based on Civil 3D objects like surfaces or alignments or those kind of things, which we're not going to take a look at today. I'll show you where these are located. And we'll look at point styles, creating them and editing them, and then editing point tools. There's quite a few of those, and then ultimately point groups. So to help you guys do this, we're going to work through a little sample problem and show you how this kind of all comes together. So if you haven't had a chance to open these up also, you'll find under this week section, you will find down here under the lecture handouts, open up the field notes, the schematic A and the schematic B. So the field notes should look like this. We're going to start out with point information. You're going to need this information. So this is northing easting information. And then we're going to be doing some setups at different instrument positions and locating points by angles and distances. And then there's our point group information that we're going to be utilizing. So you can have this handy. I suggest printing it out, but if you can have this open that you can look at it or refer to it, that'll be important. The schematic A is what we're going to be looking at first. We have a little control network, control 1, 2, 3. That represents a traverse kind of thing. We're going to locate some points by angles. So we're going to have this spike that we're going to locate. That's an existing spike, an iron pin, and an existing spike over here. We're going to do that by angles and distances. And then we're going to establish these set points, these set spikes, PK nails, whatever, based on doing different routines. I'm going to show you how to do that. And then we're going to utilize the second one to complete this kind of thing. So run you through that, and then I'm going to show you a little bit about how these point group kind of things work. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll fire up Civil 3D if you haven't already. And one thing we need to do right off the bat, if we're going to be turning angles, is we have to go to the ambient settings and set that up properly, because otherwise everything's going to be off slightly, because Civil 3D's template uses a decimal degree format, and we typically are not going to be working in that format. So what I want you to do is go ahead and open up a drawing file, and we're going to go to settings. and right click on the drawing name and go to edit drawing settings. So you'll kind of want to get used to doing this pretty much every time. So this is a case where if you created a template file, you could save this as your template file. You wouldn't be doing this every time. So I need you to get used to it though. So you should open up the drawing settings dialog box, navigate to the ambient settings tab, and scroll down until you see angle. Open up the angle section, and you'll notice that it's set to decimal degree. That would be a problem for us. We want to make sure we set it to one of the DMS settings. I'm going to just go ahead and apply it and close that. Okay. So that impacts not only how angles list, but it also impacts how you enter them. Okay. So that's really, really important. All right. So back to the prospector. So we have this area here under the prospector called points and point groups. Right now, nothing exists here. So as we start to develop these things, we're going to see both of these populate. And if you're familiar with points under the draw, I think they probably still have them in here. There is a way to establish points in AutoCAD. That's this command here. That's the AutoCAD points command. So those are just the dumb XYZ points. They have no intelligence associated with them. So what we're going to be talking about are these guys over here where you have points. And notice you have point creation tools, and then you have different ways of doing it. So you have miscellaneous, intersection, alignments, which would be based on a Civil 3D alignment, which we don't have yet, surfaces, and then they have slope and interpolate. No, we're not going to talk about some of those right now, but later on we will. Let's see what else they have in there. You can create Kogo points from a corridor. You can create them from other things, from blocks, from land desktop points, which is an old thing. You can even take AutoCAD Civil 3D points and convert them into, or AutoCAD points rather, and convert them into Civil 3D points. So there's a lot of different ways you can establish points. So we're going to use mostly the miscellaneous tools and some of the intersection tools today as we develop this. So now the transparent tools are these guys over here. This tool is really, really important when you get into Civil 3D, so you really don't ever want to lose it, so leave it there. But there's ways of establishing things. You know, that's an angle distance command. You have bearing distance, but we have point commands right here, so you can do it by point number or by point name or by point itself by just selecting. You can think of these as O-snaps that are specific to Civil 3D objects. So unlike the O-snaps down here, which we have endpoint and those kind of things, these are kind of like snaps for Civil 3D objects. And one thing I should also mention, you can snap to an object point in Civil 3D using a normal O-snap, but the one you would use is what's called the node O-snap. So it won't snap to any of these other things. Well, actually it will. You got to be careful because endpoint could snap to the endpoint of the symbol. So if you want to snap specifically to a Civil 3D point and get to the right point on it, you would use the node O-snap. So we're going to be utilizing combinations of these guys as we get into that. All right. The other thing we're going to look at first is creating a point through miscellaneous routines. So what I want to do is let me go back over here. We're going to start this project. Let's see. We're going to start this project at schematic. I want you to look at that lecture 8 schematic one and and then we're going to start here. So the first thing we're going to do is enter control points 1, 2, and 3. We're going to use these northing and easting values, okay? And as we type this in, we're probably not going to see anything right away. So we're going to have to set up some point properties as we get into this. Okay, so have this handy. So we're going to be utilizing that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go back in here. So we're going to establish a point. And we're going to go to miscellaneous, and what we're going to use is this option called northing and easting. So just like its name implies, it's going to allow me to type in a northing value then an easting value. So it's kind of like using an X and Y in AutoCAD. So go ahead and click on that, and you should get this tool that'll pop up. So this is your create points tool, and this sets up a template more or less for how the points are going to come in. So let's step through this a minute. If this isn't open, by the way, there's this little arrow right here, so you can just open that up like that. So the first one is your default layers. Notice that these are going to go on a layer called vNode, and you can change that, or you can just let it ride. I'm going to let it ride, so all of our points are going to exist on the same layer. Now, you might think, well, that's kind of detrimental, and some people don't like that. They like their points on a lot of layers, but there's better ways to manage points. In other words, you can leave them on there all one layer, but we can manage them through point groups differently. So we're gonna let them just go on the vNode layer for now. So I'm not gonna change that. Point creation, this one's kind of an important one because this is going to tell you how it's going to prompt you as you're entering these things. So notice you can do local coordinates, you can do grid coordinates, you can do whatever here, but what I want to look at is where it says prompt for elevations and it says manual. So if we're not using elevations and everything is just X, Y, or northing and easting, and we're not worried about an elevation value, then we don't really want to be prompted for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to none so that it doesn't keep asking me for an elevation. So it just makes my prompts a lot simpler. You can have both a point name and a point number. I never use point names, so I always leave this set to none, and you can notice it's set to none by default. So for the prompt for description, we are going to be using descriptions, so we want it to prompt us for descriptions. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to manual. Now there's some other settings in there that are pretty cool. You can do it automatic. So if I set it to automatic and I'm doing, let's say, a bunch of edge of pavements, I don't need to type in edge of pavement every time. I can set it to automatic. And when I set it to automatic, I can put a description down here and it'll just read that in for me. But I'm going to make sure we're going to set that to manual, okay? So we're setting the prompt for elevations none, prompt for name none, prompt for descriptions. We're going to set that to manual. So now the other thing we want to look at is description keys. Right now, description keys are set to be turned on. So a description key is a way that when you type in a description on a point, it automatically will hit the description key and it'll put it in a certain point group for you. It'll bring in a symbol for you. It'll bring in a layer style or a style and layers and all kinds of stuff. If you're doing downloads from, like, say, a data collector, this is a wonderful way of doing it. But right now, since we're not going to use them, I want you to disable your description keys. So we're going to set the description key disabled to true, okay? And I want you to probably do that for the next couple of assignments as we're using points. Okay, so we're going to drop that off. Format name, let's look at that real quick. Notice it just gives you a counter. So these actually you really can't do a whole lot with. We're not going to worry about them. But I do want to go to point identity. So when you do point identity, what it'll do is it will automatically give you a point number, and then it will use either sequential numbering from that point, or you can override the sequential numbering. So if you're doing everything sequentially, it's nice, then you don't have to key things in. But if you like blow the point, so if I start at, like, say 51, the next point's automatically going to be 52, then 53, 54. If you want to be prompted for the point, what you can do is set your sequential numbering to false, so that way it's going to prompt you for a point number every time you do that. So let's go ahead, we'll prompt that for that, so we don't have to do that sequential numbering, okay? All right, so we've got this set up, all right? So now it should be asking me for a point northing down here. So I'm going to go down here, and the first northing we're going to type in is 51.25, and then hit enter. And then for the easting, we're going to type in 49.15, and then hit enter. It should not be asking you for a elevation at this point, but it should be asking you for a point number. If it has one in there, you can just accept it. If not, then make one and then hit enter, okay? So the description now, it's going to come up and it's going to ask me for a description. I'm going to use a description of C&T for control. So people out in the field will use descriptions for everything that they're locating, and they usually use three key characters. It's not case sensitive, so we can do it uppercase or lowercase. I'm going to just do everything in uppercase. So I'm going to set Control C and T, and then I'm going to just hit enter. So I've actually created a point at this time, but we don't see it on the screen yet. So we're going to go ahead and just enter the next one. It should be asking me for a northing. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the northing, 4925, and then hit enter. For the easting, that's going to be 4564, and then hit enter. Point number should be 2. And notice, because we used control last time, C and T, it's already there. So I just hit enter and it's accepted it. So now we're looking for point 3. So we're going to enter the coordinates for point 3, 4823, enter. 4864, enter. Point number 3, and then control. And at this point, then just go ahead and hit the escape key. And one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and close this box as well, and just do a zoom extents, Z enter, E enter, and you should see your points right there, like that. Okay. Any questions? Everybody okay so far? Is everybody getting their labels to show up like that?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Sometimes they don't show up. So if they don't, we have to turn them on, but we're not going to worry about it as long as you can see them. Is anybody not experiencing or having problems with that?
So I'm having problems because it's just asking me for a location, not the actual northing easting.
You're doing northing and easting for the creation?
No, like I go to create the point and it just asks me for location, like it's not northing then easting.
Okay, because here's what you're doing. When you go to points here,
yep,
miscellaneous,
okay,
make sure you're using manual.
Okay.
You need to use northing and easting.
Okay, okay.
Try that now. And I'll let everybody, is everybody else okay? Let me know when you're ready, McAllister, so we can move on together. Anybody else issues?
Okay, I'm actually good now.
Okay. Anybody else issues? All right, let's take a look at this point. While you're working on it, let me know, McAllister, before we move on. But if everybody wants to zoom up on one of these points, if you click on it, you'll notice this guy. If you have your properties, your quick properties showing up, it'll tell you this guy's a COGO point. And you have a couple of grips here. Now you got to be careful. If I hit this grip and I move it like this, I'm actually moving the northing and the easting value. I'm changing it, so you want to be careful with that one. This other grip is your label grip. So notice I can pull this guy out, and it's like a multi-leader at that point. So I can do that kind of stuff with it. Okay. We're going to talk about these in a little bit here, but this guy is composed of two things. The point, that X is the point style, and this is the point label style, okay, the one in CNT, okay? Is that working for everybody? Anybody have problems? Okay, so let's go over to the prospector, and we should notice now we do have a point group showing up here. So we actually have points. If you open up that plus, there is a point group here called the all points point group. Now Civil 3D holds every point that's a COGO point in the all points point group. So it's impossible to have a point on your drawing that doesn't exist on that if it's a Civil 3D point. So what we can do though is fracture those out into other points, which we're going to start, or into other groups, which we're going to start to do here. But what I want you to do is right click on the all points, or left click on the all points point group and right click on it, and you'll see there's a lot of different things we can do within this, okay? One of the things I want you to do is go to this edit points. This is going to open up the panorama, and we're going to get a vista that's going to pop up. And we can actually do things like edit points in here. We can edit descriptions. We can change point numbers. Okay, so if I wanted to change that point number right there to 1, from 1 to something else, I could double click in that and I could call that 101. all right? So that's some pretty neat stuff in here. Also, if your northing and easting is flip-flopped, you just drag it so that it flips like that. So if you want to read it out in easting, northing, you just flip them like that. So I can move these guys to any location I want. If I'm not using names and all that other stuff, I can actually turn that stuff off. So if I'm right-clicking one of these guys up here, you'll notice that I can turn on. If I'm not using names, I can just turn that. Any of these guys that are turned on, I can get rid of, okay? So I don't need to see all that if I'm not utilizing it. Now, what I'd like you to do before we move on any further, check the coordinates here, okay? If these guys are incorrect, then fix them. So you should have for, let's see, 0.1. Oh, I got mine easting, northing. I'm going to flip it northing and easting. So let's see, you should have 5125 and 4915, and then 4925 and 4564, and then 4823 and 4864. So if you find a mistake in here, just double click in it and change it in there, okay? Is everybody okay with that? So the other thing we can do is we can do some things within this edit other edits. So what I want you to do is click on 0.1, hold the shift key down and come down to 3 and click it, and it should highlight everything. Because these are control points, we never want them to move. So I want you to highlight these and then right click, and we're going to do what's called lock. So you should see this lock symbol that occurred here. What this means is these points can never move now. All right, they're going to stay intact. All right. So once you get that, once you get your coordinates correct, and once you've locked them, you can dismiss the panorama. So if I try to come here now and click on that grip, it's not going to let me do anything. Okay. So if you're using points that are really, really important, you want to make sure that you lock them. Okay.
How'd you lock those? What was the key sequence?
All right, so you can do it several different ways. Were you in the panorama?
Yes.
Okay, so go to the edit, see the panorama. Just click on the first point, hit the shift key, and click on the third point. It should highlight them all. Is that working?
Yes.
And then right click, and you should see lock, unlock in there. Basically, it'll say lock for you in the shortcut.
Yes.
Okay, hit lock, and it should lock them. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And when you have that symbol, you know they're locked, okay? So that's one of your first editing tools. Now that doesn't lock the label, okay? That just locks the point, okay? So we're going to now utilize points to do some things. One of the things we can do is use the line tool. So if we go up to the line tool, notice there's a create line by point object. So this is cool because all I have to do is touch the point anywhere, touch the point anywhere, touch the point anywhere, and touch the point, and it draws it specifically to it. When you get done, just hit the escape key. So that's my control traverse. So the points are locked, but the lines aren't, okay? Is that good for everybody? We good? All right. So right now, everything's, remember, on the all points point groups. We're going to start to talk about point groups here. And I'm going to create a point group, and I'm going to put these guys on their own point group so that they recognize the fact that they're control points, okay? So we're going to come over here to the point groups, right click, and we're going to go to new point group. So you should get this dialog box that pops out for you, okay? So we want to give this a name. So I'm going to call this name, and if you look on my sheet 1, I'm calling this the control point group. So I'm just going to I can literally call this anything I want, but we're going to use control so that when I look at this, I know, hey, that's my control points. Okay. We alternately can have a default style that we want to use. So we can create any style that we want. We can use a group of styles. So what we got down here, there's one called benchmark. So I'm going to set that to benchmark. My current style is point number, elevation, and description for the label style. Well, I'm not using elevations and it really doesn't matter, but I'm going to go ahead and set this to point and description. Okay. Now I have to tell it what to include in this point group or exclude, or I can do what's called query builders. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We're going to use this include tab. And notice you can do it by numbers matching certain numbers or by elevations matching or names. Well, we're going to use it by descriptions. So we're going to toggle on description and we're going to key in the description name, which is in this case, CNT. And that's control. If you go to your point list, you should now see that you have 3 points in that point group. Okay. So I'm going to apply this and I'm going to okay this. And you might have to do a regen. And my control isn't working. Okay. Did anybody get theirs to change to controls there? This always works that way. Let's see what happens. Apply that. Is anybody showing a symbol here or not? Is it still an X?
It's still an X.
All right, I'll show you why. This can drive you nuts in Civil 3D because the default symbol on this is overriding my point group symbol. And this is a good thing to know. It doesn't always work this way. So we're going to go to the control point group. So I just want you to right click on the point group and we're going to edit the properties of the point group. So it does say benchmark there, right? And point number and description. Is that good for everybody?
Yeah.
All right. So go to the overrides tab. We don't always have to do this, but apparently I'm going to override the style. This should take care of it, and override the point label style. Apply that and okay that, and that one should now be reflecting that. Is that working now? I hope we don't have to do that with every setting, but we'll see. Is that working now? You're getting your symbol to show up now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, we're going to see point groups are going to be pretty cool. They're kind of like, you can think of them kind of like layers. And in fact, we're going to create different types of layer settings, or different style settings. Now, we may have to go in and override them. And if you do, it's not a big deal, but you shouldn't have to typically. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some points. So back to our drawing here. Let me go back to, let's see, this drawing. So we now have control point 1, control point 2, and control point 3 in. So now what we have is control that we found monument. We found a spike out here in the road, 101. We found an iron pin back here. So we located that. And we have a spike out here in the center line of the road. We're going to utilize this to construct our boundary. So to locate this one, we occupied point 1 with an instrument. We backsighted point 2. We turned an angle and we went a distance to locate that point. Okay, so we're going to do what's called a manual location, but we're going to do what's called a side shot off of it. To locate 105, we set up on 2, backsighted 1, and we got an angle and a distance to this. And for 103, we occupied 3, we backsighted 1, and we turned an angle and a distance, okay? So we are going to go back into Civil 3D, and I'm going to start here at point 1. We are going to do a points, what we call manual, okay? So our settings should all be good in here. We shouldn't have to mess with anything here. So what we're going to do is do what's called a manual. It should say manual, and it's asking you for a location. So manual is useful if you just want to pick a point on the screen, just arbitrarily, or if you want to snap, like if I wanted to put a point right there on the midpoint of that line or the end point, I could use manual. But I can also use it for side shots. So this is where we have to use the transparent tool over here. And we're going to find this little tool down in this list and make sure that this pops out. It should say, you hit it, that one right there. It should say side shot, okay? So go ahead and click on that one for side shot. So then it asks you to select a line or points. So we're going to select the line. We are going to sit at 1, backside 2. So I want you to click on the line closest to 1. And when you do that, you should see a little instrument show up. And it's showing you a rod, and it's showing you its backsighting 2. Is everybody getting that to work? We all right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to enter the horizontal angle first. 168.1503. Now I'm entering that as if it's a decimal, but it knows that I'm talking degrees, minutes, seconds. So I just enter 168.1503, hit enter. And then I'm going to enter 113.36 and also then hit enter. And it should ask me for a point number. So at this point, I'm going to call that point 101. 101, hit enter. And I'm done with that. So let's see for my description. I don't know if it took mine. Okay. So once you do that, you should see 101 show up. I actually did it twice. I got a little mistake. So if you're done, you can just go ahead and hit the enter key twice and it'll take it out. Did everybody get a point over here? Did everybody get a point?
Yeah.
Does it say like mine 101, 101?
Yes.
That was my bad. We're going to fix it, okay? Actually, that was a good mistake. 101 top is the actual point number. It also thinks that 101 is the description. So very easy to fix, okay? I didn't do that on purpose, but I wasn't following the screen prompts. So I'm going to click on the point, right click, and go to edit points. Panorama opens up to a vista. Point number is correct. You see a northing and an easting. Just double click in raw description and we're going to call that a spike. Okay, hit enter and then you can close this box and you should now see it says 101 spike. Is that good? So that was a good mistake. All right, so we're going to now establish 105. Well, we can do it a 103. So on my sheet, I'm going to 103. So it says I'm gonna occupy 3, backsite 1. So we're going to do this the same way. I'm going to come over here, points, miscellaneous, manual. Grab your side shot tool over here on your transparents. Select the line 3 to 1, closest to 3. That puts your instrument right there. We're going to turn the angle there. 124.4615. Hit enter. Distance is 62.94. For the point number, 103. And this time I'm going to enter the description properly. It's IP for iron pin. And then you can just hit enter twice. And you should see now you have 103 iron pin. How are we coming on that? Is that working for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so we have one more control point to put in here. And then we're going to set up another point group. So I'm going to occupy 2, backsite 1, and I'm going to use the information that I have for that one. Okay, so that's going to be 105. So I am going to go to points, miscellaneous manual, side shot, select the line closest to 2. Make sure your instrument is sitting on your point, your backsite, and you got your little rod. So we are now 2:28, 11 minutes and 10 seconds. Distance is 236.22. Point number is 105. And the description is spike. That's a railroad spike. All right. So you should now have 3 control points in there. I'm going to go ahead and just close this guy right now. All right, are we good now? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and create another point group. And we're going to create a point group that's going to include spikes and IPs because these are existing. So I'm going to go to the point group, right-click, properties. Now we may have to, oh, I didn't want to go to properties, sorry. Go ahead and cancel that. I actually want to go right-click, new. Right-click, new. Okay, so for this one, we're going to set up a new point group. And we're going to call this existing monuments. I spelled the word out on my sheet. If you want to use that, you can. You can make these as big or small as you want. So we're going to go to basic here. And we're going to make a copy of basic. I want you to create a copy of basic. And under information, instead of calling it basic copy, just call it basic 1. So this will be our version. So we're going to go to the marker. And notice you can use AutoCAD point markers, custom markers, or you can use these guys down here, which are blocks, which that's what the control symbol was, is a block. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to use the X, and then we're going to use that guy right there. So you should notice what it shows you here. Apply that. Okay, that. We should see now we're using basic 1. How's that working for everybody? We're going to be doing this a lot, so if you're not catching it right now, we'll come back to it.
You selected the X for the marker, and then what was the other selection?
I used, let's see, McAllister. I used that plus, or the box.
The box, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is just combining those two together.
Gotcha.
All right, apply that. And it should show you that symbol, which is nice. So you can see that in the graphics, okay? Is everybody good? Now we may have to override these, we'll see. We shouldn't keep doing that, but sometimes point groups can be kind of tricky at first, but we're gonna go ahead and include descriptions, spike, comma, IP, okay? Spike, comma, space, IP. Go to your points list summary and you should see you have both spikes and IPs in there. If that's good, you can apply that. And we're gonna have to override these point groups. So for some reason, it's coming in with every time it's using the same initial point group, but that's not a big deal. It's good to learn to know how to do this. So we're gonna go ahead, back to point, existing monuments, right click on that, go to properties, We have to go to the override, and we have to override that style. So you should now see the difference in the symbology between those points. So again, think of them like layers. You can think of those guys like layer colors and layer line type kind of things. Those are just issues. Now these guys are all on the same layer, which you might think, well, that's kind of a bad thing, but we're going to see that it's actually not that big of a deal when we deal with it. Okay. Any questions? Everybody okay? All right, so we got, if you go look at this diagram now, we've got some other things. There's this big warehouse building in the middle of this site that they're going to tear down, let's say, but we located it. So we did different locations. I think we set up at point 1 and backsided 3, and then we set up at point 3 and backsided 1. And we've got point 70 through 74. So I'm going to set this up a little bit differently and see if this will maybe work for us. But we've got some locations to do, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and set up a point for us right now, a point group before we actually import the points, so we don't have to do that after the fact. And I'm going to show you how this works. So we're going to go to point groups, right click, we're going to go to new. We're going to call this point group building. So I can set point groups up even though I don't have any points associated with them. I'm going to go ahead and just use basic for this guy. So it's just going to give me that X. I'm going to leave my label style to point number and description. We're going to tell it to include points with a description of BL. Oh, I've got a mistake on my sheet. We're going to use BLD. I have both BLG and BLD, so that was my bad. So we're going to change that. So just make sure you use BLD.